Lynn Judy Resnik was one of 7 or 8 women in the program?
Yeah, more, Peter. That first group was the small group, and they were really the pioneers. They were the ones who had to prove to the world, but most importantly to NASA. I think the world was ready for them before NASA was. Then, in fact, women could be astronauts, and what a wonderful job they have done. Watching that tape, very sad to remember that and watch that. But at that time, Judy did not have a flight scheduled. As you remember, of course, it was very competitive for all the new astronauts, all the old astronauts too, and particularly among the women, who was going to get the first flight. Sally Ride was named to the first flight for an American woman astronaut, and Judy got the next one. And part of what she was doing was being on very good behavior and doing her job very well, but she really wanted a mission. When she finally got her mission, of course, she was absolutely delighted, but listen to what she said. She said, the orbiter at this point is behaving just like a bus. It's going to drop the satellite off at its bus station. That was in 1982, and she was prepared to think of shuttle flight as routine bus travel, if you will. Now, I know she knew perfectly well it was a lot riskier than that and a lot more complicated than that, but that's the terms in which she was thinking, and I think all the astronauts. And I think the women are no different from the men in terms of getting used to it, taking the risk in stride, being perfectly aware of what they were doing, but giving it their all anyway.
I may be
sad to see that.
I may be getting an obvious answer, seeking an obvious answer here, but why do women have so much trouble convincing NASA that they were able to fly?
Well, because the space agency originally began thinking that they needed, saying that they needed military pilots to fly their spacecraft. As we talked about earlier, in fact, those early spacecraft, there really wasn't a lot of flying to be done, but it seemed as if that was the way they were going to do it, and that allowed them to dip into their Air Force and Naval and Marine pilots and into that corps and say, we're going to pick the best and the brightest from that group. And women were systematically excluded
Lynn?
because, of course, women are not in combat. Yes, Peter?
This is the NASA news conference we've all been waiting for. This is Hugh Harris, who is normally the voice of launch control, and we cannot hear him. So I can...
7:40 a.m. this morning.
15 minutes.
A national tragedy with the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger approximately a minute and a half after launch from here at the Kennedy Space Center. I regret that I have to report that based on very preliminary searches of the ocean where the Challenger impacted this morning, these searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived. The dedicated crew members of Challenger are Commander Francis Dick Scobee, pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialist Dr. Judy Resnik, Ellison Onizuka, and Dr. Ronald McNair. And payload specialists on board were Christa McAuliffe and Greg Jarvis. All early indications in the Launch Control Center, the Kennedy Space Center, have indicated that the launch was normal up to approximately 11:40 a.m. this morning, about a minute or so into the flight. Flight controllers in the Launch Control Center here and in the Mission Control Center in Houston were polled immediately after the explosion, reported that they did not see anything unusual up to that point. The solid rocket booster recovery ships were immediately dispatched to the area approximately 18 or so miles downrange from Kennedy, along with various Coast Guard and military ships, helicopters, and planes. I have taken an immediate action to form an interim investigating board to implement early activities in this tragedy. Data from all of the shuttle instrumentation, photographs, launch pad systems, hardware, cargo, ground support systems, and even notes made by any member of the launch team and flight ops team are being impounded for study. A formal board will be established by the acting administrator very, very shortly. Subsequent reports on this tragedy will be made by this formal review board. I am aware and have seen the media is showing footage of the launch today from the NASA Select system. We will not speculate as to the specific cause of the explosion based on that footage. It will take all the data, careful review of that data, before we can draw any conclusions on this national tragedy. Thank you.
Mr. Moore has time for just a couple of questions from each center before returning to the effort in investigating this tragedy. Please wait for the microphone and give your name and your affiliation. And we'll start right here with Jacqueline Bolden from Channel 6.
There were some reports that the shuttle perhaps rose a little slower than in previous launches, and there seemed to be a loud noise, and then the noise kind of backed off, and then a rush of noise again. Did you get any reports from anyone else that this seemed different from the people who either experienced it, saw it here live?
I have not heard any reports at all relative to that effect that you just described. None whatsoever.
Okay. Up here in the third row, Michael.
My name's Kevin Hamilton from WGIR in Manchester. The entire Teacher in Space program was designed to introduce more people, specifically youngsters, to the space program. This obviously is not the introduction you intended to make. What do you think the effect, the long-term impact that this is going to have on the youngsters that you were hoping to attract?
Well, I think we'll have to address that as time goes on. And again, I think today, the events of the day makes it much too early for me to speculate on the long-term impacts.
Okay, Al Selstead from Baltimore Sun in the first row.
Mr. Moore, at this time, do you have any estimate of how much liquid fuel was in the external tank at the time of the explosion, and how much explosive power, say in terms of TNT, that remaining liquid fuel might have been equal to?
No, sir, not at this time. You realize what we've been doing since 11:40 this morning is we immediately pulled our senior management together in this program, and I formed an interim board to ensure that all relevant data to this event would be impounded and would be made accessible to the investigative people that will go and take a look at it. I can't answer your specific questions relative to how much fuel was on board at this point in time. The board, when it's formally reported by the administrator, formally formed by the acting administrator, I'm sure will go into those kinds of questions, but I can't answer it right now.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here before going to the Johnson Space Center for questions. Here in the right opposite you, Jackie.
Peter Van Sant from CBS News. We received a call today from a member of an academic group who said he was on a tour group that was at the Pad 39B on Saturday night. This group was supposed to get off the bus to take a close look at the shuttle, but was not allowed to because this caller says they were told that a derrick arm had struck one of the tanks on the shuttle and that some repair work was being done. Are you aware of this incident, and are you aware of any problems at all with any of with either the external tank or the two solid rocket boosters?
No, we looked at that on Saturday. There was not even in the same area that of the tank. It was a small box, heater box, that had about a quarter of an inch of the insulation out of 5 inches that was scraped. It was a very minor scrape. It was repaired, and everybody, all the experts in the program, took a look at that, and so we closed it off at that point in time.
Wait for the microphone. I have to have the microphone.
There was no damage to any tank, or this arm did not strike any tank as far as
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, we're going to the Johnson Space Center for questions. Just a couple of questions.
Yeah, this is the Johnson Space Center. We have a question from Paul Reeser, Associated Press.
Yes, Mr. Moore. Was there any debris of any description recovered by the vessels, and if so, what was it?
We do not have any detailed debris reports at this point in time. That certainly is something that we're looking at, and we will be impounding all the debris that we recover, and we've set up plans here to store that debris so that the investigating group can go in and look at that and assess that in great detail. I do not have any detailed reports right now on debris.
Okay. Bruce Nichols. Mr. Moore, with all the delays that you experienced last week, the delay again this week, was there any pressure building at all to try to get this one off the ground? Was the pressure up there? And who made the final decision to go or no go?
There was absolutely no pressure to get this particular launch off. We have always maintained that flight safety is our top priority consideration in the program, and we look at the status and readiness of the systems based on that. We thoroughly reviewed the activities over the weekend and yesterday, and continually reviewed the status of Challenger right up until launch this morning. All of the people involved in this program, to my knowledge, felt that Challenger was quite ready to go, and I made the decision, along with the recommendation from the team supporting me, that we launch.
We're going to the Marshall Space Flight Center for a couple of questions.
Martin Berkey with Huntsville Times. Can you tell me what this does to the schedule on down the line, including the launch at Vandenberg?
No, I'm not prepared to do that. What I have done is basically suspend operations for a few days till we can sit down and assess this. And, you know, we're obviously not going to pick up any flight activity until we fully understand what the circumstances were relative to this morning's launch. So in the interim, near-term time, we basically suspended operations until we get a handle on what our problems were this morning.
Nick Miller, WAFF Television in Huntsville. What part will Marshall Space Flight Center play in the investigation, since the propulsion system was the responsibility of the Space Flight Center here?
Well, they obviously have to play a very strong role in the investigating what happened this morning. As you know, the Space Shuttle program is built around a team effort, not only involving the Marshall Center, but also the Kennedy Space Center and the Johnson Space Center. All of the elements have different responsibilities, and clearly Marshall has the propulsive responsibilities on the shuttle. They will play a very dominant role, as will the other three centers I mentioned, as well as anybody that is contributing to the overall program and has some relevant information to add will certainly play a part.
Okay, we're moving to Washington for questions from NASA headquarters. Okay, there is a problem with our audio circuits to Washington. We are going to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena.
Bill Hines of the Chicago Sun-Times. Mr. Moore, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the appointment of this interim review board and said that it would be making statements from time to time. Not to put any adverse interpretations on this, it sounds a little bit like a news blackout, and I'm wondering if your objective is to consolidate information, what will be the point of issue of all those announcements in the future? And are other people not involved in that review board forbidden to talk?
Well, let me correct your statement. First of all, I said that I had appointed an interim review board. That interim review board is composed of the senior members of the NASA team here to take immediate actions on impounding data. The acting administrator is expected to appoint a formal review board very shortly, and it will be left up to that review board in order to determine its progress reports in terms of their findings. What we have done here today is to move very quickly so that all relevant data could be impounded, and all actions that are needed to be taken in order to preserve as much information as we can on the circumstances of this morning can be preserved. And that's the nature of the work that I've implemented today, and I expect a formal board to be established very, very shortly, within the next day or so, by the acting administrator.